Here, I'm just doing the London recap for this morning on EU and AU, although not much happened in AU, so there won't be much to go through on it. So the key detail this morning was that we had swept this major low on the daily. It wasn't a swing low because obviously we switched bearish back up here, but it was a very significant low, so I would be very surprised if we don't sort of get a decent daily pullback, at least up towards the premium of the daily leg, if not sort of a more complex pullback. But it hadn't really mitigated any demand, which we have done now, but it was still possible that we were going to get a pullback, so I was sort of mindful of that on the 4 hour and the M15, that we had swept that major low, which sort of governed a lot of my thinking with the sells on EU this morning. But yeah, that's the daily. We're within the sort of daily range anyway. That pullback was only 179 pips, I think, so it's not quite enough to counter structure if you're being mechanical, which I like to be. So yeah, the daily's bearish, but looking at maybe getting a pullback following the sweep of the major low and then the mitigation of the demand now. The 4 hour, yeah, 4 hour, this is the most recent 4 hour boss, so we're working within this sort of range here. Yeah, it was bearish, so again, following the sweep of the daily low, I was expecting a fallback, but then it was always possible that we push down and mitigate sort of the daily demand. So the sells this morning, the M15, were sort of in around here. Again, it's very low on the legs, so not the best value to be selling, and then it wasn't really supported by any supply and demand. So I was thinking we might get a pullback up to sort of here. I really like that zone, sort of swept liquidity behind the inside bar, caused this boss, and it's in the premium leg, so I was thinking we might sort of get a pullback up towards that. But there was nothing this morning, no 4 hour chalk around to suggest that a 4 hour pullback was imminent. But even when there is no 4 hour chalk, given where it was sitting, you could still sort of read between the lines. And on the M15, you know, if you get a sign of bullish intentions, you can look to trade it. But yeah, that's the 4 hour. M15 then. This I got, there was a nice sell sort of after price hit a refined M1 supply sort of within the M15 supply. Personally, I sort of had a bullish bias at this stage because price, we had sort of the close below this low, which is an IBOS to me now, which sort of once we got that IBOS, I sort of viewed that there as sort of a protected high. Now it's not a swing high, so it's not a super strong high, but I was sort of anticipating that that should hold if we were to continue bearish. So whenever I came to my desk, price had sort of spiked above the high and we had a bullish shock. So at this point I was sort of looking for longs. Now again, this sort of was me getting caught up in my own biases because sells are more than valid until the market shows you otherwise. But I had this POI drawn on here, so he's looking at maybe we might get a pullback into that there and then get it again, get the next leg to the upside, or get a bullish pullback sort of on the 4 hour and the daily and the M15. But yeah, we mitigated the refined M15 supply and then just absolutely tanked. There was no entry at all. It just blew through that zone, so we'll delete that off. Then we mitigated sort of the daily demand, and there was this M15 supply here. It was at sort of the EQ of this leg, so it wasn't the war relative to the recent price action. It wasn't the worst value for sells, but just given where Evelyn was and the fact we had mitigated daily demand, sort of were in the deep in the discount of the 4 hour and the M15, due a pullback on all time frames. I was just sort of, I wasn't madly in love with it. And then yeah, it is more than valid, but it's just personally me being a bit more conservative. Then on the M1, I see the first entry here. See, we mitigated the refined M1 supply, sort of swept liquidity going into it, and then you had the bearish chalk there. This was sort of happened pre-Frankfurt, so I wasn't really interested. And we sort of pushed down. We got a decent reaction from this demand, but then the demand just pulled back into the supply that caused the chalk. So at this point you could say supply is in control, and then price sort of pushed down here. And then coming into Frankfurt, yeah, you had supply and control, but it left these sort of equal highs behind. So I just wasn't mad keen on the entry model either. I thought it might get spiked, and then literally it just absolutely tanked the Frankfurt Open. But yeah, it's a valid position. Like, it's backed up by M15 supply. It was just that given how the higher time frames are looking, and then the M15 shock, I sort of got caught looking for buys, but that was sort of me getting caught up in my own bias, because I probably should. It's one thing I'm working on, is trying to be more neutral and sort of try and hedge the market both ways. Whenever you can make a good bullish argument based off the higher time frames, but until sort of the M15 changes, and you start to see supply getting respected, wherever it is more than valid and probably advisable to sort of keep selling until you get the message from the market to stop. So yeah, price just absolutely tanked down here. None of these were valid M1 continuations for me. So you got this sort of M1 boss. So in theory, this was a strong M1 high, and then price sort of pulled back into this here. But the extreme is unmitigated, so you would probably want to play the confirmation entry from it, and then there was no M1 shock until sort of down there. So there was no confirmation entry, and then yeah, basically the supply eventually ended up holding, and then we got another leg to the downside, and this sort of created the M15 supply here. Pulled back into it, obviously mitigated the daily demand down here and got quite a strong V-shaped recovery, so it's not the best in the world, but had the sort of sweep of liquidity. Into the sort of refined buy to sell wicks, so you can see like that's where the momentum came in. Yeah, there's volatility is quite high, so a 2 pip stop would have been very small there. Let's see, it wouldn't have been even anywhere near the EQ, so you might want to maybe use a bit of discretion, increase it to 3, just so that you're at the EQ. But yeah, it wasn't the cleanest entry model. Like, it was a decent sort of V-shape at start, but then price started to fall quite correctively, and then started to come back up with a lot of momentum. So yeah, it's definitely valid. It's valid M15 supply, valid entry model, but it's just given where everything was sitting on the higher time frames, I sort of wanted to be a bit fussier. But that is AU. Yeah, the 2 nice trades out. They were valid. Fair play to you if you caught them. Just I was sort of caught waiting for clearer price action. And AU. Sorry, computer's on a go slow. Yeah, so on the daily is bullish, but the internal structure is bearish. We had the bearish chalk, and I'm sort of being respecting supply and demand. So we're in this sort of clean daily demand. Now, we already had a bit of a reaction to it with the wicks, and the reaction technically failed. So you could argue that is valid supply. So it's not the best area to be looking for longs currently, but it is conceivable that we could get a pullback at least up to this supply. So yeah, daily's bullish, but internal structure is bearish. The 4 hour, we had this big leg down, and then we had the bit of a pullback that qualified as swing structure because it was more than 80 pips. So then we had another boss whenever we closed below this lows. Then I was looking basically, obviously we've mitigated the 4 hour supply as well. Daily's bullish, so we could conceivably get the next bullish daily leg to the upside from here. But obviously try and stay neutral and sort of keep selling until the market shows you otherwise. In this case, we have pulled back into sort of supply at the extreme of the leg that caused the most recent boss. So it was more than valid to be looking for sells, but you could also look for buys if you see bullish intentions in the M15, sort of anticipating the next daily bullish leg from the daily demand. On the M15, so when I was doing the markups this morning, we were sitting in this supply, sort of this flip zone. Buy to sell candle was pretty clean, so I was aware that we could sort of get the next bearish leg to the downside, sort of take this week M15 low, but we had the bullish chalk as well, so it was possible that the sort of bullish order flow could sustain, and we could eventually switch bullish with the M15 taking hold, but we had mitigated the M15, the 4 hour supply, so sells were a good value. I wasn't really looking to trade this zone because sort of it didn't sweep, and it had basically liquidity behind it, so I was thinking I might be using inducement for this in here, but at the same time I didn't want to be trading directly into it. We had this sort of flip zone then where price reacted to the demand, and then the demand failed, so I was interested to see whenever we got the decent reaction from this here, the bearish M15 shock there, that maybe this supply could hold and we could get a nice sell to sort of take it down to the low. But M1, You can see we had the sweep and then the bearish chalk, so that would have been a valid place to sell, but there's no tag. Again, you can see here that was sort of a flip zone, reacted that wick and then pushed down, mitigated splice, and that was sort of your last unmitigated sort of flip zone apart from the extreme. So we pushed down sort of slightly correctively, but then we mitigated the M15 supply. So I definitely wouldn't be leaving a limit order on any of the M1 POIs in here on account of it having mitigated the M15 demand, but it was feasible to trade a confirmation entry from one of them in anticipation of sort of this demand failing, and then the bearish M15 trend continuing. But you can see that's the M15, or that was the M1 shock there after the mitigation of the supply, so price never came back anywhere near this supply. So then this was basically your M15 flip zone. So I was looking, you can see all this, that demand failed. So at this point it made sense to target the week 4 hour and M15 low, but it didn't quite pull back into the M15 supply, but that would have been a valid entry there if we had just hit the supply. That was your shock, and then you could have entered on the extreme there. But yeah, a few missed entries in that there. That was a valid entry, and then the confirmation entry from there was valid. I was looking at both ends, but neither of them pulled back, which AU has a tendency to do. It doesn't mitigate the sort of extreme POIs as cleanly as AU in my experience. So that is a recap of the EU and AU for today. I didn't take any trades myself, but there were a couple of valid sells on AU, and then I placed a couple of orders on AU, but they weren't tagged. So that's it. If you have any questions, guys, just drop me a message in the Discord or tag me on one of the public channels that I'll get back to you. Thanks.